Attention on deck. Welcome to the Warships podcast with your hosts, Hellord, Kami Samurai, and Vanacera.
Hello and welcome to episode 72 of the Warships podcast. After a long absence, Notser rejoins us on the podcast today. It was a real pleasure to get to meet you on Lexington for Let's Battle, Notser, and welcome back to the podcast.
Glad to be back. It's nice to see you guys again.
Absolutely. So is there anything new going on your YouTube channel, or are you just kind of trucking along as normal?
I'm just trucking along. I've been dealing with my ISP, and it takes me forever to upload videos, but we're covering all the content that they've been releasing to us the last couple of weeks. But it's been a pleasure. I really enjoy the premiums, and I really have been enjoying the French Battleships so far.
Agreed. Well, we're happy to have you here to discuss the kind of mother load of French battleships we have to talk about. So on Wednesday, January 31st, Wargaming dropped 10 new ships onto our accounts to test. Today, we'll be talking about the 8 new battleships of the French battleship line. But next week, we'll cover the new premium destroyers Asashio and Monahan, which are the Imperial Japanese Navy and the United States Navy, respectively. Digging right in, we'll start with the Tier 3 and Tier 4s, ships Turin and Quebec. Turin represents a potential dreadnought design that was never built, but is similar in form to the IJN's Kawachi and the German Nassau. Named after a famous French general, the Vicomte de Turin, the first battleships of the French line are armed with 12 305mm guns, only 8 of which can be used at any given time. Corvette at Tier 4 was the actual first dreadnought built for the French Navy. Named for the French Admiral Amédée Courbet, she features a pair of superfiring 305 turrets fore and aft, with 2 wing turrets abaft the superstructure. This gives her a very heavy 10-gun broadside at Tier 4, much more usable than some of her contemporaries. Both of these ships are saddled with extremely slow turret traverse. So, Notser, as the guest, why don't you give us a start off about talking about the low tier ships and kind of how they play?
Well, I will admit that I've spent more time at a high tier, and that's just because I think everyone can relate. The battleship play at low tier feels really inconsistent. You'll play and fire at a target, and you'll hit it or you'll completely miss it. So from the French standpoint, I just see it as a means to an end. I have to get to the ships that I want to, and the Tier 3 and the Tier 4 are very similar to other battleships for other factions like the Japanese or the Germans, as stated. And I think it's just a way to get people to be familiar, but I've never really enjoyed the whole, like, you've got gun turrets all over your ship, and you have to, like, rotate the ship all around in an awkward, like, pirouette. So these ships I just burn through so quick. I don't know what you guys feel about a ship like the Tier 3 or the Tier 4. It's just I'll be firing my gun and I'll be like, man, I wish it was in something else.
Yeah, that's pretty much how I feel too. Kami, did you get a chance to play the Tier 3 and Tier 4 a little bit?
I did. I actually played them this morning. And the Tier 3, I kind of like those ships because you just get to shoot everywhere. Like you could shoot a broadside to one side, then you can look at somebody else on the other side. But to kind of the gameplay at those low tiers is definitely different. I mean, you got battleships that sail in straight lines and DDs that are torping them, and there's ships everywhere. And the Tier 3, I feel, is a better Kawachi. I think it's on par with the Nassau. And the Tier 4, I honestly didn't really like it, but I mean it's a ship it's not going to cause you to quit the battleship line like the Miyogi did to a lot of people that were playing Japanese battleships when they come out. It's serviceable, has a lot of guns, but I mean if you like low tier play, the Tier 4 is probably one that you could play a lot. The Tier 3, I mean, if I know there are people that love that tier, but like Notser said, it's not really my cup of tea.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but you didn't get a chance to play the Tier 3 or the Tier 4, correct, Vanessa?
That's correct. Due to kind of my work schedule and everything, I only had a little bit of time. to kind of prep before the show. So my testing was pretty much tier 8 and up.
Alrighty, well, we'll hit you up for your opinions when we get there in a little bit. In terms of I'm very much in agreement with Notser and with Kami about the tier 3. It is what it is, and you kind of play it and you get through it and you're like, okay, I'm glad I don't have to do that again. But I honestly feel that the tier 4 is probably one of the better non-premium battleships at tier 4. I mean, with the super firing turrets fore and aft and the usable wing turrets, it actually felt like a very usable and very heavy broadside. Now, granted, usually those battles feel kind of like Nerf battles because it's really difficult to citadel other ships at that tier, just in general, because of the low caliber guns and the relatively thick armor. But that said, I felt like she was really quite good for her tier and kind of stands out. But again, we're back. Low tier is not something that a lot of us play a lot of. But I think that, Kami, you hit a good point that none of the battleships are dramatically worse than the battleship before it. So it's a natural desire to progress up the tree.
Yeah, and I feel they did a pretty good job on this line. And of course, we will get to the later ships in a little bit. But the tier 3 going to the tier 4 and then the 4 to the 5, I feel are a good progression, because I believe the 5 is kind of the same. Like, it gets rid of the wing turrets, but it gets a midship turret, but they're a little bit bigger caliber. So they do a good job of progressing that way. But then the line kind of, it just goes weird after that. But the 3, 4, and 5 won't make you want to quit playing the French battleships. Agreed.
But let's move on to the 5. And as Kami said, it is a little bit more standard. So, alarmed by the British super dreadnoughts, Britannia was France's response. Armed with 10 340mm guns, she was named for the French province of Brittany. Similar in form to Orion, Iron Duke, Texas, New York, and Koenig, she will be very familiar for players of most other battleship lines. And as Kami said, she has super firing turrets fore and aft and a single turret in the middle. For me, Britannia was kind of a vast improvements over the first 2 ships in playability, just in terms of I felt like the gun angles were better. I felt like the gun rotation speed was a little better, and just the punchiness of the 340mm guns is a kind of one of the nice things that you get at tier 5. But what did you guys think about the tier 5?
I certainly appreciate the tier 5s, but to be fair, a lot of nation tier 5s ramp up a vast superior version than the tier 4. But yeah, the gun angles, the 340, which is getting into familiar territory for the French, you're going to be at this caliber for a while, and I think it works just fine. I don't have any issues at all. I do recognize that they're trying to introduce sort of a weird, awkward midship gun turret, and you'll start seeing that angle be limited even more with the quad mounts. But as you go up, it's sort of Wargaming trying to teach you that you're not supposed to bow tank with these guys. You're supposed to open up because you can't bring all your guns to bear unless you do that tactic. So if you've played the Texas, the New York, honestly, any of those American battleships, you'll start recognizing, oh yeah, I'm used to this, but you have speed, which is so much better than any American battleship at these tiers. So it's a solid experience, and it makes me just want more French battleships.
What you don't have is AA. So if there's CVs in the game, if I remember right, the tier 5 AA is very poor. Is that correct, Lauren?
I mean, it's not awful, but it ain't great either. I mean, it's there, and I will agree with you completely, Kami. It's completely inadequate to protect you from the. If you have when I was playing the tier 5, I would have a couple of tier 4 Langleys on the opposite team, and they were able to swamp me without any issue, even though they were a tier below. So in that sense, I think you're right that the AA is a little wayward, and I find that the AA on these ships, just in the line as a whole, is a little odd. Like there are times where it's really good, and then there are times where you're like, why is it even on there? Why does it even have AA? It doesn't seem like it does anything. So I never felt like AA was like a real priority for this line at any point.
Yeah, I haven't really looked at the numbers on the AA, because when we're testing these, I don't really spec them. I spec them all differently just to see different things. But is it the Leon? Maybe it's the Leon. One of them has really impressive mid-range AA, but really awful long-range AA, and I think it might be the Leon. I can't remember, but the AA is very different, on each ship. Whereas some of the other lines, when you look at like the USN battleship line, AA is starting from like the New York / the Texas is a different case, but the New York, the AA progressively gets better as you move up the line. On the French battleships, I kind of feel like the AA just kind of goes up and down. There's no real consistency to how they developed it.
I would definitely agree with that. Notser, did you have any thoughts about the AA on these ships?
Well, I noticed that the Leon, it has awful a-hull AA, and then it sort of jumps up, like doubles in effectiveness when you upgrade the hull. And that's pretty much the barrier when I started feeling, okay, I can actually defend myself. I am rocking an American battleship build, though. I don't have as many 19s as I would like, and it was very generic. So I have basic and advanced firing training because I sort of saw these guys as they're going to be more independent from the team than others, and I want to see how well they defended themselves. And yeah, I think some of these are awful AA platforms. Like I definitely would take the Texas over the Tier 5. That's its claim to fame, though. And once you get past that upgraded hull at Tier 7, I feel like the AA works better. I was not impressed at all by the large gun caliber, the long range. I felt like you can't use manual AA at all to improve it. It's just so terrible. Definitely feels like it's sort of
in like the 25 to 35 DPS range. If it feels like for the long range AA on almost all of the high tier ships, it is just instead of being like 100 DPS, which is what you get on the American battleships, you get like 25 or 40. And that's
absolutely. And that's when I was like, oh, this is not a ship line that goes manual AA. It just is not. It's not in their design. Maybe it will be, but the numbers I'm seeing, the calibers are just, the DPS is more mid-range and close range. That's where your AA defense comes in. And that would make sense because they want the Americans to be the best platform, period, for AA. And they definitely are because of that.
Yeah, I mean, you. Some people talked about maybe using the French battleships as AA platforms. I just don't see it. They're like, you just don't have the long range AA to like in comparison. North Carolina, Alabama, Massachusetts, Iowa, and Montana, they all have like a 7. If you spec them this way, they have a 7.2 kilometer bubble where nothing survives, and it's that simple. Yeah. These ships don't have that.
Yeah, I kind of feel the AA on the French battleships is kind of like the IJN battleships, where you're not going to kill anything on the way in while they're attacking you, but you're going to kill the things on the way out while they're flying away from you after they bombed or torpedoed you. And that's I always feel with the Yamato, that's its AA, right? Like, because it has the really good close range AA, but carriers, as long as they get their damage in on you and they lose some planes, it's okay. But I feel that's the same way with the French. The long range AA is not going to deter carriers from being like, oh, that's a France or that's a Alsace, let's attack them, because until they get into that range where that mid-range AA kicks in, that's when you finally start to chew through planes, but they probably dropped on you or within seconds of dropping on you, and you're not going to kill enough of them to really prevent a good amount of damage. And like Notser said, I kind of feel that these ships need to be on their own. They're great for flanking as you get up the tier. And if you can't protect yourself from carriers, and we know that carriers aren't in every game, but the minute you do get into a game with a carrier and you can't protect yourself and you're trying to flank, I mean, you're easy pickings.
Well, I mean, but I also take, in the same vein, Notser talked about them being flanking battleships, and I absolutely agree that the vast majority of them are very good in that role. But at the same time, we're familiar with this. We had the French cruisers, and the French cruisers are not fleet AA platforms, not in the same way that the American cruisers or the German cruisers are, where you can spec them that they are fleet AA platforms and they'll protect your fleet. But at the same time, the French cruisers were able to protect themselves. They had kind of self-defensive AA by overloading the mid-tier AA bubble, which you can get out to, I think it's like 6 kilometers with AFT and with the anti-air range upgrade, Notser?
Yeah, it was coming in to that effect. Also, I want to highlight. I believe that the American AA, the mounts are healthier, so they survive under bombardment better. And if you don't invest in that with the French, I think you lose a significant amount of your defense before it's even usable. So it's sort of that situation where how bad is it really? Like, have we gone our full min-max competitive AA builds on our battleships, or are we playing with new toys? I mean, we just got these, and I'm trying every which way to figure out what they're good at and what they're bad at. I think they're A above average, but I definitely would pick an American if I'm going purely on a isolated, I need to defend myself and someone wants to kill me as a community contributor. I think everyone can relate to being the target of desire, and I think Americans do it far better at protecting ourselves. Having said that, though, there's a lot of fun tools with the French, and I'm really excited to just experience it and see where they take the line itself. If this is what they want, I'm pleasantly surprised because I saw the premium, and the premium tier 8 is just not. The line is much better than that premium. If you've seen any of the videos or read any of the articles on the Gascon.
And I feel like we'll get to the Alsace and the France in a little bit, but I feel like their AA is decent. I feel like those two, if you spec into an AA, and I think you could do manual on both of those and get away with it just because they have so many 100mm and up AA guns. But the mid-tier ones are pretty, you're going to struggle, I think you're going to struggle to defend anyone else. I think you can protect yourself and do enough to keep yourself from, getting dev struck. But we've always gone with the adage, if a CV wants you dead, a CV can get you dead if they're a capable CV. And I still feel that these ships fall under that category.
I wouldn't disagree. I do think that you're right, though. Looking at the tier 8, 9, 10, they do have enough 100mm plus guns that they might be able to get away with it. Particularly the 100mm guns look like they're pretty good, even though the 130s or whatever they are not.
Yeah,
quite so good.
The 100s are 178. And I have a captain here, so it's probably higher than what it actually is. But I'm looking at 178 out to 6 kilometers. Then the 152s are only 25. But I mean, if you put manual on those, I mean, the manual for those 100mm would actually get you really good AA. But we're kind of in the mid tiers right now, and looking at the Normandy, even with the upgraded hull, and let me put a captain in here real quick. Get my captain, an AA captain here. I mean, this thing, long range AA, like it's 23 DPS. I mean,
yeah, it's not good. It's not good, not good. But let's actually move on to the Normandy and Lyon. So, designed and ordered before the outbreak of World War I, Normandy and Lyon are the tier 6 and tier 7 battleships in World of Warships. They were not actually built, but they were designed. Unhappy with the double turrets of Britannia, Normandy and Lyon were to be built with 30 and 4 quad turrets, respectively. Most of their opponents will be sporting 380 and 406 millimeter guns, but these ships retain 340 millimeter guns. But at the same time, they have a heck of a lot of them. Feeling like enormous shipborne shotguns, they are the bane of the cruisers that they meet in-game, but have a real hard time dealing with opposing battleships of equal or higher tier. So I guess the question that I have for you guys is, would you rather have more smaller guns or fewer big guns?
I think that the more guns you have, the higher chance you're hitting the target. We learned this on the Conqueror. It doesn't matter the gun caliber. It's about the amount of guns. It really conceals bad dispersion or inconsistent shells. So I've had a lot of success with these ships. I don't know about anyone else, but 12 guns at tier 6 feels pretty good. 16 at tier 7 feels awesome. Every cruiser's afraid of you. Every destroyer is afraid of you. And it's hard to complain when you can knock out so many types. Yeah, sure, you give up a ton to other battleships, but if I take away your support staff, it's a lot easier to kill you too.
One thing I'd like to point out about the Normandy is the insane amount of secondaries. I mean, I think there's 24 secondaries on it? Don't tell Vanessa, but there's a lot of secondaries. And the thing that I find with the Normandy is the range. You get a really your range is, I think, almost 20 kilometers, I believe, on the norm. Yeah.
19.8.
Yeah,
It's
and
really
where does that fall in at tier 6? I mean, that's I believe that's farther than the New Mexico.
It's farther than just about everybody except for
Which,
Fuso.
we're not going to get into that because that'll be an hour-long talk about one of the best battleships in the game. But
I agree.
But before you go any further, when we're talking about range, Kami, keep in mind that very few of these ships, almost none of them, in fact, have spotter planes.
Yes, and that is a point that I think we didn't even bring up yet, and that's a good point. Is I don't think any of them have spotter planes. I believe the Alsace has a fighter, but I don't think it can equip.
You're correct. None of them have spotter planes. So at no point can you take a spotter plane in French battleships. And so that is something to kind of keep in mind with these ships, that although they may have lower range, quote unquote, they can never do anything about it.
And I wonder, I don't really understand why they don't have spotter planes. Maybe the French didn't believe in flying, but I don't know. But I guess that's what the balance is, right? They don't get a spotter plane, but they get increased amount of range, because as far as I know, the range goes up, pretty significantly. I think the France has 25 or something kilometer range without plane, which is really far. You're looking at almost Yamato level, and I'm not sure why they don't have planes, but that is something to keep in mind. So if you're used to having a spotter plane or a fighter plane, minus the Alsace, you're not going to have that ability to put up a plane, which could limit your ability to spot torpedoes, could limit your ability to shoot over islands. So keep that in mind when you're playing these ships, that they are very straightforward. They have a damage control party, they have a heal, and as you get into the later ones, you get a speed boost. That's it.
Notser, what do you feel that the lack of the fighter or the spotter plane is a real problem for these ships, or do you feel like it's just a different kind of unique path for them?
I always look at it like, what tools are available, and some people don't value their scout plane as much as they probably should, and that is definitely a weakness of the ship line. You can't use these guys to scout behind an island or hope to have your aircraft get in contact with the enemy battleship. Other than like the tier 9, it's what you see is what you're going to get, and that is a limit on players who know how to convert those skills to a kill or to a good amount of damage. And that's just something that needs to be considered. It sort of feels like baseline, these ships will be a little bit better than maybe an American or a Japanese in that regard, but those ships have the ability to convert a scout aircraft to firing over an island and having an easier time hitting a target in smoke or something like that, because you have a better perspective or even a fighter to protect yourself. So yeah, I think it's really important that you consider how useful those tools are, and they're just not available. Not a hole, B hole. There's not a single aircraft on 90% of these French battleships. And, that's kind of disappointing. But I personally am not as good with them as I would like. I'll get a good, maybe once or twice per game, I'll get a really good shot with a scout, but I won't convert that to maybe a full broadside citadel. Is it because of the gun caliber of some of these French battleships? Because they are small. You really don't target the same things, because you're not. It's just like firing on a German battleship. I expect to never citadel one. If I do, fantastic. But I'm usually going for midship, most shells on the target, plus or minus dispersion. That's how I'm treating the tier 6 and the tier 7, and it's worked out pretty well. Late tier, it's 380 until the France, right? So they give up gun caliber for the entire line, pretty much. So it's just a different focus.
Yeah, I guess one of the things, Mike, we talked a little bit about them being flanking battleships. Does the lack of the spotter plane reinforce that role for you, Notser? Because it'll push you away from being next to islands, because you're not going to be able to see over them, and you don't want to be too close in case something comes around. So in my mind, that reinforces you want to be out on the flank away from islands.
Yeah, I would absolutely, that in the quad mounts. So France ships have notoriously been less accurate per shell than other battleships. All this coupled together, there is no way I ever want to round an island and have a enemy DD. that's point blank with me. It's terrifying, the prospects of that. So yeah, I tend to sail for a flank. Like I was in a game with Kami, and he was on the primary flank of my team, and they were going toe to toe with the enemy, and I was trying to get so I could punish the enemy that was firing on my teammates, and it felt really natural. And I didn't feel like I was missing any tools. I had plenty of range. I really enjoyed that. But it's just like every other battleship line. They have a very specific identity. If you play to their strengths, you should excel. If you are not given the opportunity to play to their strengths, it's going to be a tough slog. That's all I got to say.
Yeah, and with, we're going to get to the ratio in a minute, but the flanking maneuvers tend to be what I would say you'd want to do in these ships. I mean, you look at the speed. I think the speed's actually pretty good. Like the Normandy, at tier 6, 29.5 knots. I mean, that's hauling. I mean, you're almost as fast as some of the cruisers, and then you look at the Leon, what's the Leon at? 27 knots at tier 7. I mean, that's going, so you got to use what you have. And like Notser said, these ships are not ships that you're going to try to get, angled behind an island. And because you have a plane, and a lot of times when you're playing in a division or you're playing and you're going up towards an island, even solo, you're kind of worried. Like this DD was last spotted here on the map. He could be literally sitting behind the next island waiting to tort me. And you put up the plane. Oh, and you spot him. And now, his game plan is wrecked. He can't sit there and, you're not going to go charging around that island. But with these, since you don't have the plane, if you make that blind move, it could be awful because you don't know what's coming. And by the time the DD gets spotted, torps are in the water at, kilometer and a half. And what are you going to do then? So you got to play these ships differently than the other battleships. You got to use their speed. You got to use their maneuverability. You got to use their range. And, I'm not saying sit in the back the whole game and snipe. What I'm saying is get on the side of the enemy forces, flank them, use your speed, get over there. And you're going to put the enemy in a very bad position because they can't angle everywhere. And if they're trying to angle bow on to six of your teammates and you're on their side, what are they going to do? Are they going to turn? And if they turn to chase you, a lot of these ships have the speed to get away, and break contact and then re-engage at another point. So there's a lot of different tactics you got to use with these battleships over other battleships.
One of the things that I noticed is that their armor is actually fairly good, especially in the mid tiers. So you're able to, like, Normandy and Lyon, I found that they were quite good at pushing a flank, even unsupported. And I was able to tie up 4 or 5 ships at a time and kill 2 or 3 of them. By doing so, I felt like even though I died at the end of that, I killed 3 ships and I tied up 5 ships for, 5 or 10 minutes. My team was able to exploit that and win the match, even though it was kind of sacrificing myself. It really was an interesting gameplay that I haven't been able to duplicate in some of the other ships. And it was really because they have so much firepower that you can pick off all the cruisers. If a destroyer shows itself, you can delete it. And then all you have to do is tank as many battleships for as long as you can and do as much damage as you can before you go down. And all of a sudden, the ship, half the enemy team was occupied for a long period.
Yeah, and I really feel like these guys, more than any other line, they rely on a friendly spotting for them. A DD or an aircraft carrier, it's way too dangerous to play the flank without knowledge. And even if you give yourself enough room, I found more often than not, my success was directly because I had a close support in the form of a DD. Or if I got super lucky, I had an aircraft carrier that was scouting. And that's fantastic, but some people would probably prefer a ship line that, maybe it doesn't rely on your teammates to do things for you, because it's kind of random if you have support in right in battle at all. And that's the caveat I would say about these guys. They feel incredibly brutal when you are going 35 knots with your speed boost on the flank, and Yamato's bow onto your team, and you are just salivating at the giant AP broadside that's available. But you could be flanked by an enemy DD, so I could definitely see divisions loving running with French battleships and destroyers, for instance, and aircraft carriers. So yeah, that's one thing I would qualify as they don't feel comfortable by themselves without information because it's a little scary.
Yeah, and I think we're on the Leon, right?
Yes, a Normandy.
The
and the
Leon, people have referred to it as, the French Fuso. And gameplay wise, it's kind of that way. I mean, you have 16 guns. Yes, they're 340 millimeters? Yeah, 340 millimeters. But there's just so many of them. So we talked about this before we started the cast. If you're in a destroyer and you get spotted at a range where you can reliably hit a destroyer, good luck being that destroyer, because you how are you going to dodge all those shells? I mean, there's 16 shells coming at you. Now, the one thing I will say about these two battleships, the Normandy and the Leon, is they only have one turret in the front. So
yes, they have problems with gun angles that are inherent to the quad turrets.
So if you're sitting there trying to angle onto someone, I would suggest you angle away, just because your turrets, I feel like you get some good angles going away as opposed to getting committed and then you have to try to turn out. And more so with the Leon than the Normandy, because the Normandy's turrets are, you have 1 fore aft and then the midships, but the Leon has the super firing pair in the back. The angles are not great for you because of how big the turrets are. And I would definitely recommend positioning yourself into a place that you can get out of, or you can put your best amount of firepower forward. And with the Leon, I just don't, honestly, I'm not one to advocate shooting HE in battleships, but this is one where even though the fire chance is lower, you just get so many shells. I mean, if you hit a New Mexico with 16 HE shells, I mean, you're still going to do really good damage, right? So, and it might be something you have to think of because of the smaller caliber guns. You may have to shoot HE at battleships, especially if you're up tiered, because I've shot at North Carolinas, which typically are pretty easy to citadel, and I struggled to pin them. The Leon is a fun ship to play, but I feel like it's not a ship that can carry a team, if that makes sense.
Well, I have a game on my channel right now where I'm playing the Leon, and it definitely does a lot of damage. You can't play it like a typical high caliber battleship. It gives up so much, and it shouldn't even be your focus. And having said that, it does a ton broadside. There is a very clear window for the enemy to exploit you, though, and it's that gun angling that we talked about before. It's horrendous. Like Leon, number 2 gun, not even kidding you. You basically have to be perfectly broadside to have it come on. It feels like New York, Texas, Wyoming all over again. Anyone who's familiar with those. So wait for them to make a mistake. Be greedy. And Kami's definitely right. On the tier 7, you want to go reverse. You'll have a little bit more firepower going towards the target because of the 2 quad mounts in the rear. But wait until they make a mistake, and you will absolutely exploit it on these particular 2 ships, the Normandy and the Leon. The quad mount location is a problem, for sure.
Yeah, and one thing I would say, pick your targets. They are great at wrecking cruisers. I mean, 16 shells on the Leon against a cruiser, especially cruisers at, you're potentially seeing tier 5, so you're potentially seeing like Omahas. I mean, what's Omaha going to do against 16 shells? And even upper tier cruisers, it's just pick your targets, pick your fights. And like Notser said, I almost have been ignoring that middle turret unless the opportunity arises, because you do have to show basically your whole side to get that turret on target. And if somebody's paying attention, they will punish you. And one thing I don't think we've covered is the HP pools on these ships, I believe, are a lot lower than their counterparts, both the Normandy and the Leon. I believe the Leon is, what is it? At least 10,000 less than Nagato. I'm pretty sure on that.
Leon is 53,400, and I think Nagato
65,000.
Yeah, so I mean, they are not heavy ships in terms of HP, and Normandy. What's Normandy? Let's pull that up real quick.
They do have a citadel that's below the water, though, which is nice.
Yeah, Normandy is 48,300. Both of these ships have the German type of armor scheme, where they have the turtleback kind of armor. I took damage in these ships, but I certainly didn't get citadel very often.
Yeah. I think also I haven't personally come under fire from this. I think they take a lot of AP bomb damage. That's the thing, that everything lined up perfectly. I was terrified by that fact because it's very German. We all know how the Germans react to AP bomb damage. So I haven't confirmed it, but I think that's going to be a vulnerability.
No, that wouldn't surprise me at all, given that the way that their armor scheme and the tier 8, 9, 10 are the same way too. They have that turtleback kind of armor. But speaking of the tier 8, let's move on to Richelieu. Richelieu is a scaled up version of the Dunkirk class ships, which were already present in World Warships as a tier 6 premium. Named for Cardinal de Richelieu, the infamous figure of 17th century French politics, she carries 8 380mm guns, all forward of the superstructure, in 2 quad turrets. Paired with a 32mm bow, she's a terror to deal with for ships who will only ever see her bow on. With a unique playstyle and speed boost, Vanessa, do you think that she is worth the wait for the people that have been begging for this ship for a very long time?
Yeah, I definitely believe so. I mean, in the one game that I've tested with her so far, it was a fun ship, and it is definitely an interesting play style to have all your guns forward. It's kind of like Dunkirk, but I don't have a lot of experience in Dunkirk either, so I definitely have to defer to the rest of you guys on this one. But the speed and armor and the ability to, I think it has 24 kilometer range, or I can't remember, but
the 25.3. 25 that on a tier 8, that's insane.
On a tier 8 battleship. I mean, it was just silly. The tier 8, 9, and 10, just the base range of those guns. And so I found myself, just kind of going to a flank and then putting into a defensive position. Like, you're okay, what are you going to do? And then if I needed to kind of move in, well, I had the speed boost and got there rather quickly. So it was fun. I did damage. I kind of sat there and did the noob thing and slung HE and just farmed a lot of damage. Waited for an enemy battleship to damage control and then set them on fire again. And I think these are going to be very salt-inducing battleships.
It's definitely the first. This is the first one with speed boost. By the way, this is the very first French battleship where you get that, and it's the French speed boost that you're familiar with. If you've played the French cruisers, it's on forever. And we're talking about a ship that already has a top speed of 32 knots. You can use signal flag to speed it up even more, and then on top of that, the speed boost. So you're booking. You can play this very tanky, bow on near an island, and then you can convert to a flanking. You can overrun someone who's trying to tank against you and just punish the hell out of them, and that feels very empowering. I need to get more time with the ship, but there are some extreme stats that I could see this quirkiness come together. The range, the tankiness of the bow, coupled with the speed and the speed boost itself. It's an interesting style of ship.
I mean, I really feel like the uniqueness of the play style would have really lent her to be a premium, which is what I asserted on Reddit yesterday, and there was a pretty good discussion with people there. Yet at the same time, she is kind of the quintessential modern French battleship that everybody was waiting for and wanted to see, and people didn't want to, understandably didn't want to pay money for her and have her be in the base tree of the game. So in that sense, I don't have a problem with it. The funny thing for me is how much more I like Richelieu than I like Gascon, even though they're the same guns. They're just in a different configuration.
Well, to your point about the Richelieu, is it feels kind of out of place, right? In the line. You have a lot of ships that have, fore and aft turrets, and then you get to the Richelieu and everything's forward. And then you go up to the Alsace and it's back to having fore and aft turrets. And the Gascoigne is, yes, the premium, but it's set up just like the France. So I kind of see, like, I read through all of those comments and everything about that, and I find it interesting the points that people were making. But the Richelieu is the ship that everyone that talks about French battleships, like, I can't wait till that ship's in the game. So I can understand why it's in the line, so it's readily available for pretty much anyone who plays the game. But I find it to be kind of counterintuitive to the line, the way you have to play it. You have to play it differently, I feel, than the other battleships in the line. Kind of like the difference between the North Carolina and the Iowa. You know, the North Carolina is a great bow tanking battleship, but you show side, it's awful. Whereas the Iowa, yes, you show side, you get wrecked, but it's so fast that you can make maneuvers on the flank, where I feel like the Richelieu kind of fits that same mold where, yes, you can bow tank with it because of the bow that it has, and then you kind of, it makes the play a little different because the Alsace is not a bow tanking battleship. It's a flanking battleship. So, like, it kind of in the line, I feel like it's a little bit out of place, but historic wise, I can see why it's there.
And that's really interesting that you bring that up. I know this is completely moving away. Do you think it's appropriate that they compromise on the line consistency of French battleship gameplay-wise to bring a ship in that's more popular as the main line? And we've had instances where it's been a tough choice, and they've usually gone with the ship that made sense gameplay-wise for the line, rather than probably the more well-known. You know, Scharnhorst versus Gneisenau is a good example of, Scharnhorst is way more known, and people were complaining, why am I getting a ship as a premium that I honestly want in my main line, but the Gneisenau's gun caliber is the reason they felt like it was more appropriate in the main line, whereas this doesn't play like anything else. The Tier 8 is nothing like the French battleship line. It's very weird, whereas the Gascoigne, it's underpowered right now, but I could see a world where it functions more like a regular French battleship.
That was really the point I was trying to make, Notser, is that the way that Richelieu is in the line is a divergence from the game design standpoint that we have heard in terms of consistency from Wargaming. So in that sense, the French battleships are very kind of unique because they give you the ship in the middle of the line. What it feels a little bit like is Mogami. You know, Mogami's in the middle of the IJN cruiser line, and most people play it with the 155 millimeter guns, and it is nothing. When you play it with the 155s, it's nothing like the ships on either side of it. It's nothing like anything else in that whole line. And Richelieu is kind of the same way for me.
Yeah, and the funny thing about the Mogami is it's premium in the Blitz game because it's so weird. And if Wargaming could go back and do it all over again, they would probably make it premium. It's just so unique, right? So this is very interesting. I would love to hear their explanation for why they chose to put this one in, and in the past they've chosen not to. You know, have they changed? Is this the direction they want to go? They want the more well-known ship in the line, no matter how awkward that might make the experience going up the line, gameplay-wise. I would love to ask them.
I mean, when you look at Royal Navy battleships, we got 3.
Where's Vanguard?
Premium battleships. Yeah, and we don't have Vanguard, which is probably one of the better-known Royal Navy battleships. So it's like, okay, we've got a bunch of Royal Navy premiums that were the well-known ships, but then the line ships are the King George V, and which you know is a pretty well-known ship.
Monarch
but then we have Monarch. As Mouse likes to say, it's the famous and historical Monarch, which I don't have a problem with it being there, because it does make sense in the way that line progresses, because and it makes that line kind of smoothed over. And the British did test a high velocity 15-inch gun that they considered putting on KGV. So the idea of it did exist. Wargaming didn't fabricate it out of nowhere. My problem is that they didn't do that with the French battleships, and I want to know why.
Well, and all of us people that have played this game since beta remember when the Mogami was actually Tier 7 and the Miyoko was the Tier 8.
Yeah.
And I think back then the reasoning was because the Mogami could equip the 155s, right? was that why it was the tier 7 and not the tier 8, whereas a lot of people, including myself, looking at the timelines like, well, Ryoko was built before Mogami and it should be before, and then they switch it all around. And then Mogami has then been hit with however many nerfs that it's been hit with, almost into the ground. I feel like back then in development, there was a different thought process than there is now. But I do feel like the Richelieu is out of place in the line, the way that the line builds up. And it's kind of like the line takes stairs, up, and then you fall off for a tier and then you keep going again, is how I feel with the Richelieu. Whereas as much as I dislike the Gascoigne, it would have fit in the line better because it gets you prepared to deal with the way the France is set up with one turret fore and one turret aft. Whereas the Richelieu, there's no other ship in the line like it. And it really is
except
correct,
for the premium Dunkirk.
Except for the Dunkirk. So wouldn't it have made more sense for the Richelieu to be a tier 8 premium, just like the Dunkirk? And then if you have the Dunkirk, you can get the Richelieu. Yes, it's going to cost you money, but you could play them essentially the same way with a few minor differences because of tier. But at least with the Gascoigne, it would get you ready to play the France, because the Richelieu doesn't prepare you to play the next two ships after it.
I don't understand why Wargaming hasn't looked at their other properties like World of Tanks and have small splits within, a line where you have a small little diversions and you have, one tank here and one tank there. They're the same tier. They're kind of similar, but one might be heavier. One might be, I don't understand why they just haven't taken the Gascoigne and have that is in the main line, and then a small little jet out to the side and have the Richelieu right there.
They're also in the process of more, and if this was the way it's gone forever, World of Tanks had crap like this forever. They've had completely out of place tanks in the gameplay wise, but they are actively replacing those tanks right now with vehicles that feel more unified with the gameplay, and then they go and do this. I think this is an emotional choice by Wargaming. I think they did this because they wanted to have the community happy about this being a part of the main line rather than a premium. Oh, you want to sell us a ship that everyone wants, just like yada yada yada. In this instance, I think they compromised in the gameplay and the progression to satiate some of the community's outcry over just another ship that we all know and you put it premium. But it's just so weird because I pay attention to their other properties, and they're introducing Soviet heavy tank changes to more unify their design. And this is the perfect example. I could see in a year or 2 years' time this going into a alternative battleship line for the French, because it fits more with whatever line could exist rather than the main line that we have right now.
I agree completely with that, Notser. And in the discussion on Reddit yesterday, I actually got a little bit of hate mail from people that are like, don't suggest to Wargaming that they make more money off us by doing this. And that wasn't the point of what I was trying to say. I wasn't trying to suggest that we want Wargaming to make more money out of us by making Richelieu a premium. My point was that it doesn't make sense where it is. And I'm really glad that all three of you agree with me on that, because having played it now in not just supposition like I was when I was writing my article yesterday, I still stand by it. It does not belong in the line.
And I think when you look at progression for most of the ships, they're not the same, but they're similar. And I know I've used the North Carolina and the Iowa, but I feel like it's kind of the same play style that people are going to adapt. They're going to adapt the Richelieu to be a bow on, and then when they get to the Alsace, they're like, oh, it's fast, it can flank, whatever. But the Richelieu is not the correct ship for the line. I think the Gascoigne, the way it's set up, is definitely the one that should have been in. As much as I dislike that ship, and I think we can all agree that ship needs help, but it fits the line. The way the line progresses upward. And I don't know. I don't know what to say to people that are like, well, the Richelieu is fine. It's like, but there's going to be a lot of people that are going to struggle going from the Lyon to the Richelieu because they play completely different, and then going from the Richelieu to the Alsace because they play completely different. There's a lot of and it's not at the low tier where it's cheap to change. It's cheap to grind. You're getting up to the 8s and the 9s where it takes a little bit of time to grind through that XP, and I think people are going to struggle with it, and then they're gonna I can't wait to read what people say about the Richelieu shouldn't be in there. Yeah, it's gonna be a tough time for some people, because all three of those ships, the 7, the 8, and the 9, all play differently, and they're all you're looking at the 7 to the 8, you're looking at different gun caliber size, different arrangement. Then you're looking at the 8, yes, and then you're looking at an all bow arrangement. So I don't know. I don't agree with the way that the line's set up, and I don't know. It's gonna be. I think it's going to be a talking point in a few weeks when we revisit, whenever the French battleships come out and, we go over them again.
So I think we can all agree that Gascon is not really in any place that, even if it does get some help, it's not something that you're going to want to play competitively. But Richelieu, does it have a place in competitive warships, both in something like a Supremacy League or a King of the Sea, or even ranked gameplay, which we just finished up?
Well, I don't, because Supremacy League and King of the Sea have all gone to tier 10. So I don't think that's, going to be relevant unless they move back to tier 8 or whatever. But for ranked, I can see people playing it because of how fast it is. And, one thing that a lot of people like to do is, they like the, NC bow tank. But the thing that I worry about the Richelieu is the penetration value compared to what like the North Carolina can do with the bigger guns. When it comes to ranked, can the Richelieu do what the North Carolina can do in the same situation, or the Amagi? You know what I mean? Like, we don't really know because hasn't happened yet. But what do you guys think? Do you think the Richelieu can fill the same spot as other battleships? I know people played the Monarch, but when I was in a battleship and ranked, I never feared the Monarch. I was never like, oh, there's a Monarch. What is it going to do? Or,
Well, one thing to quickly, and I'm gonna ask Vanessa her input. Keep in mind that the Richelieu has 36% HE fire chance, which is the same HE fire chance that's on North Carolina, except it's going to be able to fire 8 guns at you, and North Carolina can only fire 6.
But the difference is North Carolina is probably going to hit with all 6, whereas Richelieu is probably not. At least from my little experience that I've played with it so far, I feel honestly, and this is just kind of extrapolating, but I kind of feel like Richelieu is going to be like Roma in ranked. If you're really good with it, you might be able to make it work. But honestly, in the long run, I think Amagi and NC are still kind of king of that particular niche within a competitive ranked setting.
Yeah, I had a ridiculous video, where both sides just stared at each other, bow on, and it would have been wonderful if one of those battleships would have chosen to flank. And this is where I'm sort of leaning on the French, is I love the potential that the French have with their flanking. But if we're going to be completely honest, I think the Americans could do the exact same thing, and maybe they wouldn't be able to speed into the location, but they've got all the tools that you'd ever want to do that. So I think that the NC and the Amagi, from a ranked point of view, would just, if they needed to, they could evolve one of their playstyles, one of the ships, to punish that completely stubborn tanking scenario. And I don't know that the Richelieu would provide you with that enough to justify bringing it over those. Because it doesn't have the AA of the North Carolina, and it doesn't have the accuracy of the Amagi. Or even, I kind of feel like the Amagi is better at mitigating in its sort of all guns firing full speed ahead, whereas the Richelieu, yeah, all your guns are facing forward, but if you want it to quickly get to a location, you're going to have to compromise some of your angle, and that's where you're going to take more damage than something like the Amagi, because the Amagi has incredibly weird angles on the geometry for protecting. And I just expect people to get to the Richelieu and to feel so out of place in gameplay that they might just like blank out
just
the whole experience.
Just skip over it. That never happened in my life.
It's just,
I think that the Richelieu has the potential to be a really, really good battleship.
Well, I'm not going to disagree with you there, but I feel like and you know, Kalorn, how much I dislike the Amagi. But I can I'll go on record right now and say that I played it this season in ranked and had a lot of great instances of getting on the flank of NCs that were just sitting there. I don't think, like, the Richelieu is faster, but I don't think it has the same punching power. And I don't think you can exploit those maneuvers as well as you can. Because what happens when you have to turn around? You know, what happens if they counter your maneuver and you got to turn around? I mean,
I think that in terms of ranked, I think you're absolutely right. I think that in ranked, Richelieu is going to have a hard time because of kind of there's a freewheeling aspect of ranked because everybody's kind of playing for themselves. Though I feel like if we ever do get another competitive tier 8 team gameplay style, like maybe someday down the line, if a season of Clan Wars is tier 8, I think that you could build a practical strategy around Richelieu in a way that you couldn't with Amagi, at least not the same strategy.
Yeah, and I guess we'll know that if it goes, you know, if something goes back to tier 8, or if, you know, they move clan battles to tier 8 or anything like that. I guess it'll be a fun time to figure that out. But it's interesting. Just, you know, we've covered a lot of points about the Richelieu, and I feel like it is the most divisive ship in the line. You know, because I think the next two are pretty much on par with what the line's doing.
I'll say this about Richelieu. I could see a lot of people racing up to the ship and stopping, and I can see other people just kind of racing up and maybe kind of moving on. Either way, I feel like a lot of people are probably going to keep this ship in port, like Mogami, it being just so kind of radically different from the rest of the line.
But you're right. We do need to talk about the tier 9 and the tier 10. Alsace is the high watermark for many people in the French battleship line. Named for the Alsace-Lorraine region of France, she is a combination of Richelieu and Gascon, with 12 380mm guns. Similar to Lyon at tier 7, she has more guns than any other ship at her tier, only with a smaller caliber. Fast and powerful, the only real issue that I had with this ship is the distance between her B and X turret, which I found made my accuracy of the X turret questionable. So, Notser, would you give the Alsace a thumbs up or a thumbs down?
I would give this particular ship the highest thumb up I could ever imagine. I have an insane game that I'm going to share, and I know Kami has one too. He's trying to one-up me. He got an insane game too, but I loved every aspect of this ship. The gun layout it feels like all the tier 9s, but it's got one extra gun on each gun turret. It has the speed. It has, you know, the rate of fire because you have the tier 9 module. I'm in love with this ship.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to agree with that. I took one look at it and obviously went, oh, secondaries, oh boy, and kind of went a little crazy with it. And I only got to do
secondaries? No way.
Yeah, that never happens. Never done that before. So yeah, I went in there and my first game and had like a crazy game with it. I know I had very limited test time. I'm sure I'm going to have some really bad games too, but it seems like just kind of looking at the other testers in CCs, everyone's been saying they've had really, really, really good games with this. So I kind of fear the nerf bat might be coming to this ship, but oh my gosh, it just, the rain of fire that you can put out on someone. And I don't think people are kind of ready for those French secondaries to just start raining in, because I kind of closed in a little bit with the Yamato, and you know, we were trading shots back and forth, and I was tanking them pretty well, and got outside of Yamato's secondary range, and then I just kind of opened up a little bit, and it's like, surprise, and yeah, they were really starting to hurt quickly, and it was kind of comical, very, very comical.
Well, besides the ship looking awesome, I feel like the modeling on the Alsace is great. But I feel like it's a ship that I could play battle after battle in and never get bored. It has so many combinations of fun between the guns, the secondaries, and I'm not a secondary guy, but this is a ship that I would consider putting secondaries on. The look of the ship, I mean, it's awesome. And yes, I will agree with you. The front turrets seem to be pretty far from the rear turret. But there really isn't anything wrong with this ship that I found. And I mean, I've consistently put up really good numbers in it. And it is the only ship that gets the plane. So take advantage of having a fighter to go along with everything else that's great about this ship. And this is where I think the Richelieu is pretty good at AA, but this ship, if you were to spec it to AA, I mean, I think it would be pretty nasty to have it AA, and it would definitely be able to protect itself. But it's an awesome ship, and I would definitely, I don't play a lot of tier 9s, but this is a ship that I would play a lot in with friends, and it lends yourself to play it however you really want to play it. I mean, if you like to sling HE, you get 12 barrels of sling HE. If you like to, get on the flanks and shoot AP, do that, because you're gonna be successful either way with it. And another thing that we didn't touch on it is the concealment. If you're built for concealment, 12.6 kilometers on a tier 9 battleship. Just saying.
Yeah, and I just want to highlight a couple things. So far we're all in love with it. The range it gives up, it's got a maximum gun range of 20.3 kilometers. And that fighter is only a fighter. You can't change it to a scout aircraft, I believe. Maybe they'll change it when it comes out to live, but so far I've only been able to use a fighter on it. And this is the first French battleship that has secondary gun range that can reach out past 10 kilometers, because its base is 7 kilometers. So obviously you equip it with all that equipment. But yeah, you go from, that's the one weird thing is some of these ships, the range is insane, and then others, not so much. But I don't think there's so many things about this ship that are so good. I can't wait to share my game on my channel. And I was all happy, like, oh yeah, I did 2,700 base XP, and then Kami over here shows off like a 3K, and it's just consistent. A lot of the community contributors have been showing off crazy games in this, and I want to echo, I think it's good because people are playing it correctly, Wargaming. I don't think it's good because it's completely overpowered.
Well, I think it's an interesting point, because now we have 3 tier 9s that are like kind of the top of the tier in terms of power. You have Missouri, which is an accurate ship with 16-inch guns. You have Musashi, which is a beast with 460 millimeter guns. And then now we have like a low caliber, lots of guns boat in Alsace. You now have 3 distinct different play styles, and we haven't even thrown in Friedrich de Grosse, to play at tier 9 that all 3 of them can hurt each other in different ways.
I'm impressed that they introduced something that feels different, because you look at, the Lion, HE, Mega Heel, this is nothing like that. And you look at the Friedrich der Grosse, it has the ability to load the 420s, every day. And it's got secondary gun range that is the best in the game at that tier. Then you look at the Americans, you got the Iowa and the Missouri. I mean, and then the Japanese, it just brings up this poor Izumo is just giving up so much compared to everything else, right? I'm really in love with this ship, and I've been in love with a lot of 9s, so it's exciting for tier 9 battleship gameplay.
Oh yeah, that thing's still in the game, the Izumo. I forgot about that thing. Huh. Yeah, thanks for the reminder. No, but the Alsace is awesome, and I would really not be surprised if a lot of people just play this, and that's kind of where it stops. I mean, I'm not saying don't go on to the France, but I'm just saying this might be where a lot of people are like, this is kind of what I wanted in a French battleship, and this is where I'm going to play. Because really up-tiered, I don't feel the struggle. Like, with the Izumo, I always felt kind of like, oh, man, the Yamato's just going to hit me in my face, take 25K, and he's going to do it again. With this ship, you just go dark and go reposition and go do your own thing. It has a lot going for it, and I wouldn't be surprised if you see a lot of these played where, people may own the France, but they may not just play it. They might just play this.
I actually think that this is going to be one of the most retained tier 9s that people actually play, because one of the things that I did want to bring up is that, and it's kind of typified by Alsace, is I had fun in the French battleships. Even sometimes, they were a little wonky. I still had fun playing them. Whereas the British battleships all felt very powerful, but I didn't have fun playing them. Does that make sense to any of you?
Absolutely. And I feel like this ship is kind of like the Fletcher for U.S. destroyers. It's just so damn fun. And I completely agree. Everyone who plays this ship is probably going to keep this tier 9 and then maybe, also buy the France and kind of keep both.
Yeah, I think you would be insane to sell this ship. This is by far the best French battleship in the game. I'm very confident in saying that this is it. This is why you go up the line. You go for the Bismarck for the Germans. You've got the Missouri that you want for the this is it. If you are excited to play the French, you should be excited to play the Alsace. I and everyone I've talked to have adored this ship.
Well, and one thing that I could say about this ship, with the British battleships and that short fuse AP, most resorted to just shooting HE all the time. The Alsace, you can do either. It has a 38% fire chance on its, so if you get into a situation where you got to shoot HE, you can. But it's also rewarding to know when to shoot AP in the ship, and I think that's something that is awesome. That it feels like a battleship, right? Like I feel the British battleships, with the exception of the Monarch and the Queen Elizabeth, you just shot HE in them, right? And that's what you did. Whereas with the French battleships, I finally feel like it's a battleship line. It's not a giant heavy cruiser line. Whereas I felt like the British battleships were. They just shot HE at most things, and that's what you did. Whereas with these, you're a battleship. You shoot AP, you do damage, you get awesome broadsides, you get cool numbers, but in the end, it's truly a battleship. You can tank damage in these, you can deal damage, and you feel like you're a battleship, and that's what I love about the Alsace, the France as well, or France as well, but the Alsace is really the ship, I think, that a lot of people, including all of us in here, and probably most people that love battleships, will play the most out of all these battleships.
Oh, that's a pretty good teaser for people that are looking forward to it. But we do need to talk about the ultimate iteration of French battleships, France. And it's an upgunned version of the Tier 8 Gascon, which we talked about a little bit earlier. Armed with 431mm guns and a potential 21.1 second reload time, France is an absolutely unique battleship at Tier 10. But I foresee her becoming somewhat controversial. What do you guys think of France? And in particular, is she on par with the other Tier 10s?
That's an interesting question to pose because I have enjoyed my time playing it, but it's very different. It has 50% in the forward, 50% in the rear, and that's a big issue for a lot of people. It doesn't play like the other, the premium Tier 8. We've played it, obviously, as community contributors, and we're used to that, so this is very comfortable for us. But for a lot of players, they're going to be like, what the hell did I just walk into? Because you can't bow tank. There's really no incentive to bow tank. If you are bow tanking, you might as well play a different battleship. And that could be disappointing. Having said that, the reload is insane. The ability to get on your flank of the enemy is absolutely the most rewarding experience I've had in a long time, just in general, playing any ship. So for that to be the built-in playstyle, it's really fun.
Yeah, in my game that I had last night with it was on our favorite Tears of the Desert. And I first kind of went in because it was Epicenter and found myself kind of going against a Missouri, a Yamato, and a Frederick. And just kind of like, well, I was utilizing the islands a little bit, kind of trading fire back and forth, but I was not trying to open up broadside and get bolt turrets on. I ended up kind of utilizing the islands, going in and out of stealth, but really just backing off and getting to where I could really use the range and the rate of fire. And what I started finding success was just, alternating the turrets and having that almost constant rain of fire, every 10, 12-ish seconds or so. I was using the reload mod. And, okay, you DCP'd, all right, a couple of seconds later, and just, tried to keep the fires going, then flanked a little bit. Oh, a destroyer kind of came in, used the secondaries. I even got jumped by a Shimakaze, and I don't think they were ready for the speed boost because I just kind of, went from not really moving to all of a sudden moving really, really fast. And the Shim just, all their torps just went right behind me. And then, well, it disappeared and sunk. And then, we went in and won the match. So it definitely was different from Alsace, but there was some capabilities there. But I definitely feel this one more so than you have I'm going to flank, I'm going to really rain down fire repeatedly and quickly, and I have the range to do so. So the Yamato that was trying to sit there and just kind of slowly tank was taking a lot of fire and being on fire a lot.
One thing I will kind of maybe the best part about Gascon is the speed boost. And while I have a lot of trouble with that ship on a lot of levels, the speed boost makes Gascon not immune to torpedo fire, but very difficult to land a devastating strike with torpedoes on. And I feel like France is the same way, because when you use that speed boost, you will vastly outdistance even their worst estimate of where they think that you're going to be for torpedoes. And I was able to outrun flanking Shimakaze torps several times in this ship and Gascon.
My thoughts on this ship, like Notser said, do not bow tank in this ship. Another point, make sure you take the reload module on it. You have plenty of range. I mean, you get 26 kilometer range without anything. So you have plenty of range. Reload mod is king for this ship. I mean, when you're a battleship and you're shooting every 21 seconds, good luck having another battleship match that. Use your maneuverability and your speed. Don't sit in one place. This ship will take a lot of getting used to because you don't have the same amount of firepower. So aiming in this ship is key. You have to be able to hit the target. You have to be able to put the shells where they need to go because you only firing a full salvo. You only get 8. So if your aim's a little off, you don't have, you're not a Montana, you don't get 12. So make sure your aim is on point. Use this ship, use its ability to flank like Notser and I did in that game earlier where, he had flanking shots and everything. You can do that in the ship because you're tanky enough to do it and you're fast enough to do it. AA wise, if you set it up, you can save yourself. It's great. For that. I mean, you will take damage from carriers because you're not going to kill all their planes, but you'll be able to mitigate most of it. One thing I will say about all these battleships, their AA tends to be pretty weak, so HE will kill a lot of it. But the France especially, just don't bow tank. Whatever you do, don't be that guy or gal that is sitting there with your one turret looking at the enemy while they're shooting multiple turrets at you. Use its speed, use the angles, and do your best to get some good shots off. I mean, it will be frustrating sometimes. And one thing I will say that is with this battleship that's more frustrating than any other tier 10 battleship is your inability to really hurt destroyers. I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but you get into a lot of situations where if you're in a Montana and you're shooting at a destroyer, you're going to wreck that destroyer. In this ship, not the same kind of luck, which,
unless you have the HE loaded, which does really nasty things to destroyers, I found. But other than that, I think you're right because it just doesn't have enough shells to make overpins.
So that is one area that you might struggle in, especially if you're really adept at shooting destroyers with AP. This ship will struggle. But other than that, just getting used to the ship for most players is going to be a bit of a challenge. Good players or players with a lot of experience, this ship won't be any problem really picking it up. But people that may skip a lot of the other ships in the line and move straight to it, you're going to struggle. And don't give up because you will learn to play it correctly. And I find it to be a very rewarding ship once you learn to play it correctly. And that's the cool thing about the French battleships. You actually got to learn to play them. They play differently. And I think that's very good for the game.
And it's not like learn to play by loading HE. This is actually a whole identity that is enjoyable. That's the thing is we've all played British battleships. I don't really go back to them that often. They're not as fun as I would have hoped it would have been, and I don't think that's a problem for. I don't think it's Wargaming's fault. I just think the British had the largest HE, and they were going to be the most extreme. And what came from it is that HE gameplay is sort of secondary on a battleship. It's really not a compelling part of it. The compelling part to me is to locate and destroy when I get a broadside or something like that. And this is all of that. You are absolutely discouraged to bow tank. You are absolutely encouraged to keep your guns firing. It's a chore to deal with DDs, but it's fun. And I definitely think this line more than others, I would probably not go directly to the tier 10 and just play the tier 10 because it might be a long learning experience. I would, if you have the ability, I would probably get the last few and just have a good chance to learn them rather than just going to the 10. The 10 is great, but it's a different beast with its gun layout and the lack of bow tanking. You're just not going to do that. If you're doing that, you might as well play another line.
Yeah, looking at these ships in particular and where kind of wargaming in the game has come from the British line of battleships and now what we are testing and ready to see with the French battleships, it's actually got me even more excited for the potential in what we might see with Italian battleships, because I feel that wargaming is found something really good with these French battleships, and maybe they can parlay that and take that into the Italian battleship line, which, playing with the Roma and playing with Giulio Cesare, I'm just excited. It's got me even more excited for things to come in this game.
Well, I think that looking back, that all of us sound pretty positive about the French battleships, more so than I felt like we felt about the previous Royal Navy battleships. So kind of on a scale of an interesting to play scale on 1 to 10, what would you guys give the overall French battleship line? Kami, let's start with you.
I would give it a 10. I'm very interested in playing because one thing I look for in a line is how fun each ship is. And we've got to play each of these. Well, most of us, Vanessa hasn't because of her work, but she will. And I found each of them to be worthy of playing. And whereas with the previous battleship line, I kind of got bored at it and just went, I was like, whatever, they shoot HE, get the Conqueror, go do a bunch of damage. Whereas these, they're actually fun to play. And I feel like a lot of people are going to find these ships worth it to do the grind. And, we played this game for a long time. Grinding isn't all that fun for us anymore. But these ships actually would be fun to grind the whole line. So I'm going to give it a 10. And I'm going to say that by the end of the, in a couple months after the ships are released and people played them, I think a lot of people are going to put these ships ahead of the British battleships. And I think a lot of people might even put them on par with, the American and the Japanese.
Notser, what about you?
Oh, it's a solid 10. This is such a better line than the British battleships for a gameplay enjoyment standpoint. I love the Pan-Asian destroyers. Like I love lines that force me to play the game slightly differently. And it's not bad or boring. It's a very entertaining experience from the start to the end of the game. And I feel that way about every single French battleship. It's challenging the battleship play that I'm familiar with, but it's rewarding it because you're seeing that conversion when you get the flank on a target and you're taking these quad mounts and you're going, and it's just such a pleasure. And I am so excited for future lines, and this would honestly make me address maybe HE wargaming if we continue this, because it's like, man, you just made the British battleships, as the line previous to the Pan-Asians, and I can't believe the difference I feel playing these. I look forward to loading into every single game in the French line, and I can't say that. I can't say that with a straight face for the British battleships.
Well, what about you, Vanessa? In terms of how interesting you found the line?
Well, I'm going to give it a 9 because, the Alsace, that's where you should go because that ship is fun. And I mean, you guys have played the other ones, and just kind of hearing, and also kind of see. I looked throughout the tech tree, and just looking at what they offer and what they bring, the capabilities that they have, and the potential for fun gameplay. Yeah, I totally agree. I think a lot of people are going to just have good, simple, plain fun with these ships and really enjoy them.
I'm going to have to go with Vanessa and give the discount the line a little bit and give it an 8. And the reason that I do that is I love the Alsace, I love the Richelieu, and I love the 6 and the 7, but I'm not on board with the France yet. And I don't know that I'm going to be, because it's one simple little thing. It's the gun angles that the France's rear turret can fire at. You have to give up so much broadside to be able to use that rear turret on France that it's just it can be very punishing, especially in a tier 10 match. So just because the tier 10 I think is a little bit below some of the other tier 10s, I have to discount the line overall. But there are so many strong ships and so much fun to be had playing them that there's no question that it's head and shoulders above the previous Royal Navy line.
Hater in the house. No, I mean, I can see that point. But I just feel like the reason why I gave it a 10 is because these truly feel like battleships. Like, that was my biggest complaint about the British quote unquote battleships. They didn't really feel like battleships. These truly feel like battleships.
And I completely agree with you there, Kami. It's just I'm not on board with France yet, and maybe as I play it more over the next week or two, I will feel differently. But for now, I'm just kind of holding off on deifying the whole line yet. But thank you very much for coming and talking with us today, Notser. It was great to have you. And, I know there's a lot of people that watch your content, and you have so much content that it's great to hear your opinions on stuff.
Oh, it was great. I really appreciate talking to you guys. Enjoy it. I talk to you all the time, but obviously the listeners don't get to see what we're talking about. But yeah, it's a pleasure. Kalorn, Kami, Vanessa, I love talking to you guys, and you guys do a great job with this podcast. So appreciate you inviting me.
We appreciate having you, and we appreciate the contribution that you make for the community as well. So, and I'm looking forward to getting to see you again sometime, because it was really great hanging out with you, and I hope that some more people in the community get to do so as well in the future.
Absolutely.
Well, that's it for this week, folks. Next week we will talk about the 2 new premium destroyers, Asashiho and Monahan. Remember, our podcast episodes are now released on YouTube with a listener gameplay as backdrop. If you have a spectacular game and would like to be featured on the podcast YouTube, please drop us an email at warshipspodcast@gmail.com with your replay, screenshots of the end battle screen, and a brief summary of the game. As Vanessa said as well, next week we will include a wrap up for the ranked season and kind of what went right, what went wrong, and kind of dig into it a little bit in comparison to what our expectations were at the beginning of the season. As always, follow us on Facebook and Twitter for updates between podcasts. We, of course, want to thank our amazing Patreon backers. If you're interested in supporting us, please consider becoming a Patreon backer yourself. We also want to thank our listeners for our biggest month ever, as 19,000 people listened to us in January. Take care, everyone, and we will see you next week.